The winter of 1885 brought more than just bitter cold to Raven's Rest, the lone inn standing defiant against the howling mountain winds of Colorado's Shadow Spine Range. As sleet pelted against frost-covered windows, Marcus Cole wiped down his bar with the same methodical precision he'd maintained for the past 7 years, his weathered hands moving in slow, careful circles that masked their true strength. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 3 men who'd ridden in just before nightfall watched. Those hands with predatory interest, their own fingers never straying far from well-worn revolvers. Their leader, a broad-shouldered brute with a face carved by bar fights and bad decisions, drained his 4th whiskey of the evening before slamming the glass down hard enough to make the nearby oil lamp flicker. "Another round, old man," he growled, lips curling into something that might have been a smile if it held any warmth. "And make it the good stuff this time, not this watered-down piss you've been serving." Cole's hands never broke their rhythm on the bar's polished surface. "That's Fairfield's finest whiskey, friend. Same as you'd get in any reputable establishment from here to Denver." His voice carried the quiet weariness of age, pitched just loud enough to be heard over the wind's mournful howl. The brute's companions, a lanky youth with a badly healed broken nose, and an older man whose dead eyes suggested intimate familiarity with violence, exchanged knowing looks. Their leader leaned forward, breath heavy with alcohol and malice. "Reputable, he says," the man sneered, reaching across the bar to grab Cole's wrist. "Tell me something, Innkeeper. You hear what happened over at Wilson's Creek last month? To that other reputable establishment?" Cole's pale blue eyes, magnified slightly by the wire-rimmed spectacles he wore, blinked owlishly behind smudged lenses. "Can't say that I have. News travels slow up here in winter." His free hand continued its methodical cleaning, though anyone watching closely might have noticed how it never strayed far from a certain spot beneath the bar. The brute's grip tightened. "Shame what happened. Place burned right to the ground. Owner tried playing the hero." He made a gun with his free hand, pointed it at Cole's head. Bang! Guess he wasn't as reputable as he thought. A log shifted in the great stone fireplace that dominated the inn's common room, sending sparks dancing like fireflies in the dimness. In their light, Cole looked every bit the aging innkeeper, from his slightly stooped shoulders to the grey, threading his temples to the wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose. Yet something in his stance, in the way his feet had shifted ever so slightly on the plank floor, spoke of a different sort of experience entirely. "Wilson's Creek, you say?" Cole's voice remained mild, almost distant, as if discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. "That's Blackwood territory, if I recall correctly. Man named Thomas Wilson ran the place. 4 children, if memory serves. Youngest just turned 6 last spring." The brute's smile faltered slightly. "You seem awfully well informed for someone who claims news travels slow. Man, in my position, you hear things." Cole adjusted his glasses with his free hand, the gesture somehow making him appear even more harmless. "Hear about a lot of things, actually. Like 3 riders matching your description, being seen near Willow Bend right before the Kerrigan Ranch was hit. Or how poor Deputy Myers ended up face down in Cooper's Creek, with 3 distinctive bullet holes in his back." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The younger thug's hand had drifted to his holster, while his dead-eyed companion had gone completely still, the way a snake does before striking. "Are you trying to imply something, old man?" The brute's voice had lost its mocking edge, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Cole's reply was interrupted by the creak of the inn's heavy oak door. A blast of winter air announced the arrival of 2 more travelers, a woman bundled against the cold and a man whose marshal's badge caught the firelight. The woman pulled back her hood, revealing copper-colored hair and features that carried an echo of Cole's own. "Evening, Papa," she called out, stamping snow from her boots. "Marshal Evans was kind enough to escort me back from town after—" Her voice trailed off as she took in the scene at the bar, the way the three men had tensed at the lawman's arrival. "Evening, Sarah," Cole replied calmly, as if his wrist wasn't still caught in the grip of a man who'd murdered his way across. 3 territories. Marshal, bad night to be out riding. Evans, a tall man with iron-grey hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice, nodded slowly. "Getting worse by the hour. Thought I'd check in, make sure you're not having any trouble." The brute finally released Cole's wrist, his face twisting into a rictus of forced joviality. "No trouble here, Marshal. Just having a friendly drink with the proprietor." He turned back to Cole, voice dropping to a whisper meant for his ears alone. "We'll finish this conversation later, old man, when there's less official company about." Cole resumed wiping down his bar, his movements unchanged. "Looking forward to it, friend." As the 3 men shouldered past Sarah and Evans toward the stairs leading to the guest rooms, Cole caught the marshal's questioning look. A slight shake of his head was all the answer he gave. Some conversations were best held in private, away from ears that might carry tales to dangerous places. Sarah moved behind the bar, her movements carrying the same fluid grace that had marked another woman in Cole's life long ago. She began arranging glasses with practiced efficiency, but her eyes never left the stairs where the 3 men had disappeared. "Those men," she said quietly. "They're the ones from the posters, aren't they? Blake Morgan and his crew." Cole's hands stilled momentarily on the bar. Blake Morgan, the name carried weight in certain circles, spoke of fire and blood and bodies left in shallow graves. 7 years ago, before he'd buried his past beneath the quiet routine of innkeeping, Cole would have known exactly how to handle men like Morgan. Back when he'd worn a different name, carried a different kind of authority, "Wanted men or not," he replied, voice pitched for Sarah's ears alone. "They're guests in our establishment. As long as they abide by the house rules, they'll be treated as such." His eyes met Evans across the room, carrying a weight of unspoken history. The marshal had been one of the few to know the truth about Marcus Cole, about why a man with his particular set of skills had chosen to vanish into the anonymity of innkeeping. Sarah's fingers brushed the small derringer she kept hidden in her apron pocket, a habit Cole had never quite managed to break her of. "And if they don't abide by the rules—" Cole adjusted his glasses again, a gesture that somehow seemed less harmless now, more calculated. "Then they'll learn why Raven's Rest has never lost a guest to violence in 7 years. His voice carried the weight of old wounds, of debts paid, in blood and gunsmoke. Why no one who's ever threatened this place or its people has lived to try again. Outside, the winter storm howled like a hungry wolf, rattling windows and drowning out the sound of Morgan and his men talking in their rooms above. But Cole's ears, trained by years of survival to catch the whisper of a gun being drawn or a hammer being cocked, picked up enough to know they weren't settling in for a peaceful night's rest. 7 years of quiet routine, of building a life far from the shadows of his past, had led to this moment. Soon Blake Morgan would learn what the deadliest gunfight in Kansas Territory's history had taught its sole survivor, that sometimes the most dangerous men were the ones who'd learned to hide their teeth behind mild smiles and wire-rimmed glasses. The storm was about to break, and with it, every secret Marcus Cole had buried in the high mountain snow of Raven's Rest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Marshal Evans moved closer to the bar, his boots making no sound on the well-worn floorboards. 20 years of frontier law enforcement had taught him to read men like Morgan, to sense the violence brewing beneath false smiles and honeyed threats. He'd also learned to read men like Cole, men who carried themselves with a stillness that spoke of experiences best left unspoken. "Sarah," Cole's voice remained gentle despite the tension humming in the air. "Why don't you check our supplies? In the root cellar. Winter's long up here, and we're running low on preserves." His daughter's sharp eyes caught the familiar signal. The root cellar, with its reinforced walls and hidden exit tunnel, had been one of Cole's first additions to Raven's Rest. "Of course, Papa. Marshal, would you mind helping me with the heavier crates?" Evans shook his head slightly. "Need to have a word with your father first, if you don't mind." He waited until Sarah had disappeared through the thick oak door before speaking again, his voice barely a whisper. "Blake Morgan's crew hit 3 places in the last month. No survivors. They're not here for whiskey and a warm bed, Marcus." Figured as much. Cole's hands had finally stopped their endless cleaning motion. "They mentioned Wilson's Creek. Thomas, Wilson was a friend." "Was," Evans agreed grimly, "until Morgan's bunch burned his place down. Word is they're working their way through isolated spots, looking for something. Or someone." Cole's wire-rimmed glasses caught the firelight, momentarily obscuring his eyes. "Someone like the only man to walk away from the Broken Sage massacre? The one who put 6 of the territory's most wanted in the ground before disappearing?" "Stories about that day have grown with the telling," Evans replied carefully. "Some say it was just luck. Others claim the lone survivor had to be some kind of ghost. Man who could shoot like that, heal from wounds that should have killed him." He let the implication hang in the air. "Ghost stories," Cole dismissed, but his right hand had drifted to his chest, where beneath his simple shirt lay a web of scars that told a different tale. "Dead men don't serve drinks and keep inns." "No," Evans agreed, "but they might hide in plain sight, building something worth protecting while waiting for their past to catch up." He glanced toward the stairs. Morgan's reputation, the way he operates, it's too similar to the Broken Sage gang. Same patterns, same brutality. Cole's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. A subtle redistribution of weight that turned the harmless innkeeper into something altogether more dangerous. "You think he's connected to them? What happened that day?" "Think it's worth considering why a man like Blake Morgan would bring his crew this far into the mountains in the dead of winter to hit a lonely inn." Evans' hand brushed his badge, a gesture of old habit rather than reassurance. "Especially an inn run by a man who appeared out of nowhere 7 years ago, right after the territory's bloodiest shootout." The fire popped again, sending new shadows dancing across Cole's face. In them, Evans caught glimpses of the man he'd pulled from the blood-soaked dirt of Broken Sage, more dead than alive, but still gripping his smoking revolvers. The man who'd made him swear to tell the world that every soul involved had perished that day, including the legendary shooter known only as Ghost Hand Mason. "If Morgan is connected to Broken Sage," Cole said finally, "if he's here looking for a dead man's ghost, he's about to learn why some legends are better left buried in the past." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The younger thug's hand had drifted to his holster, while his dead-eyed companion had gone completely still, the way a snake does before striking. "Are you trying to imply something, old man?" The brute's voice had lost its mocking edge, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Cole's reply was interrupted by the creak of the inn's heavy oak door. A blast of winter air announced the arrival of 2 more travelers. A woman, bundled against the cold, and a man whose marshal's badge caught the firelight. The woman pulled back her hood, revealing copper-colored hair and features that carried an echo of Cole's own. "Evening, Papa," she called out, stamping snow from her boots. "Marshal Evans was kind enough to escort me back from town after—" Her voice trailed off as she took in the scene at the bar, the way the 3 men had tensed at the lawman's arrival. "Evening, Sarah," Cole replied calmly, as if his wrist wasn't still caught in the grip of a man who'd murdered his way across 3 territories. Marshall, bad night to be out riding. Evans, a tall man with iron-grey hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice, nodded slowly. Getting worse by the hour. Thought I'd check in, make sure you're not having any trouble. The brute finally released Cole's wrist, his face twisting into a rictus of forced joviality. No trouble here, Marshal. Just having a friendly drink with the proprietor. He turned back to Cole, voice dropping to a whisper meant for his ears alone. We'll finish this conversation later, old man, when there's less official company. About, Cole resumed, wiping down his bar, his movements unchanged. Looking forward to it, friend? As the 3 men shouldered past Sarah and Evans toward the stairs leading to the guest rooms, Cole caught the marshal's questioning look. A slight shake of his head was all the answer he gave. Some conversations were best held in private, away from ears that might carry tales to dangerous places. Sarah moved behind the bar, her movements carrying the same fluid grace that had marked another woman in Cole's life. Long ago, she began arranging glasses with practiced efficiency, but her eyes never left the stairs where the 3 men had disappeared. Those men, she said quietly. They're the ones from the posters, aren't they? Blake Morgan and his crew. Cole's hands stilled momentarily on the bar. Blake Morgan, the name carried weight in certain circles, spoke of fire and blood and bodies left in shallow graves. 7 years ago, before he'd buried his past beneath the quiet routine of innkeeping, Cole would have known exactly how to handle men like Morgan. Back when he'd worn a different name, carried a different kind of authority. Wanted men or not, he replied, voice pitched for Sarah's ears alone. They're guests in our establishment. As long as they abide by the house rules, they'll be treated as such. His eyes met Evans across the room, carrying a weight of unspoken history. The marshal had been one of the few to know the truth about Marcus Cole, about why a man with his particular set of skills had chosen to vanish into the anonymity of innkeeping. Sarah's fingers brushed the small derringer she kept hidden in her apron pocket, a habit Cole had never quite managed to break her of. And if they don't abide by the rules... Cole adjusted his glasses again, a gesture that somehow seemed less harmless now, more calculated. Then they'll learn why Raven's Rest has never lost a guest to violence in 7 years. His voice carried the weight of old wounds, of debts paid, in blood and gun smoke. Why no one who's ever threatened this place or its people has lived to try again. Outside, the winter storm howled like a hungry wolf, rattling windows and drowning out the sound of Morgan and his men talking in their rooms above. But Cole's ears, trained by years of survival to catch the whisper of a gun being drawn or a hammer being cocked, picked up enough to know they weren't settling in for a peaceful night's rest. 7 years of quiet routine, of building a life far from the shadows of his past, had led to this moment. Soon, Blake Morgan would learn what the deadliest gunfight in Kansas Territory's history had taught its sole survivor. That sometimes the most dangerous men were the ones who'd learned to hide their teeth behind mild smiles and wire-rimmed glasses. The storm was about to break, and with it, every secret Marcus Cole had buried in the high mountain snow of Raven's Rest. Marshal Evans moved closer to the bar, his boots making no sound on the well-worn floorboards. 20 years of frontier, law enforcement had taught him to read men like Morgan, to sense the violence brewing beneath false smiles and honeyed threats. He'd also learned to read men like Cole, men who carried themselves with a stillness that spoke of experiences best left unspoken. Sarah. Cole's voice remained gentle, despite the tension humming in the air. Why don't you check our supplies? In the root cellar? Winter's long up here, and we're running low on preserves. His daughter's sharp eyes caught the familiar signal. The root cellar, with its reinforced walls and hidden exit tunnel, had been one of Cole's first additions to Raven's Rest. "Of course, Papa. Marshal, would you mind helping me with the heavier crates?" Evans shook his head slightly. "Need to have a word with your father first, if you don't mind." He waited until Sarah had disappeared through the thick oak door before speaking again, his voice barely a whisper. "Blake Morgan's crew hit 3 places in the last month. No survivors. They're not here for whiskey and a warm bed, Marcus." Figured as much. Cole's hands had finally stopped their endless cleaning motion. They mentioned Wilson's Creek. Thomas. "Wilson was a friend." "Was," Evans agreed grimly, "until Morgan's bunch burned his place down. Word is they're working their way through isolated spots, looking for something, or someone." Cole's wire-rimmed glasses caught the firelight, momentarily obscuring his eyes. Someone like the only man to walk away from the Broken Sage massacre. The one who put 6 of the territory's most wanted in the ground before disappearing. "Stories about that day have grown with the telling," Evans replied carefully. "Some say it was just luck. Others claim the lone survivor had to be some kind of ghost. Man who could shoot like that, heal from wounds that should have killed him." He let the implication hang in the air. Ghost stories, Cole dismissed, but his right hand had drifted to his chest, where beneath his simple shirt lay a web of scars that told a different tale. "Dead men don't serve drinks and keep inns." "No," Evans agreed, "but they might hide in plain sight, building something worth protecting while waiting for their past to catch up." He glanced toward the stairs. Morgan's reputation, the way he operates, it's too similar to the Broken Sage gang. Same patterns, same brutality. Cole's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance, a subtle redistribution of weight that turned the harmless innkeeper into something altogether more dangerous. "You think he's connected to them? What happened that day? Think it's worth considering why a man like Blake Morgan would bring his crew this far into the mountains in the dead of winter to hit a lonely inn?" Evans' hand brushed his badge, a gesture of old habit rather than reassurance. Especially an inn run by a man who appeared out of nowhere 7 years ago, right after the territory's bloodiest shootout. The fire popped again, sending new shadows dancing across Cole's face. In them, Evans caught glimpses of the man he'd pulled from the blood-soaked dirt of Broken Sage, more dead than alive, but still gripping his smoking revolvers. The man who'd made him swear to tell the world that every soul involved had perished that day, including the legendary shooter known only as Ghost Hand Mason. "If Morgan is connected to Broken Sage," Cole said finally, "if he's here looking for a dead man's ghost, he's about to learn why some legends are better left buried in the past." Dawn painted Raven's Rest in shades of steel and frost. The mountain, sun doing little to warm the bone-deep chill that had settled over the inn. Marcus Cole moved through his morning routine with practiced precision, each gesture carefully measured to reinforce the image of a simple innkeeper growing slow with age. He stoked the great fireplace first, his movements deliberately stiff, as he added logs from the neat stack Sarah had arranged the night before. The inn's common room still carried echoes of last night's tension, though nothing seemed disturbed at first glance. Cole's experienced eyes, however, caught the subtle signs of careful observation, slight scuff marks where Morgan's men had tested the floor's soundness, the way certain chairs had been repositioned to provide better views of both exits. They'd been busy after retiring to their rooms, planning something that Cole doubted involved a peaceful departure. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and baked goods. She'd inherited her mother's gift for cooking, among other talents that Cole had carefully nurtured over the years. "Morning, Papa," she called out, her voice carrying just the right note of daughterly affection. "Sleep well?" Cole allowed himself a small smile, one that reached his eyes but not quite his instincts. "Well enough, considering the storm." He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a gesture that had become both habit and camouflage. "Are our guests still sleeping?" "Haven't heard a peep from upstairs," Sarah replied, but her hand brushed the pocket where her derringer rested. She'd added a second one after last night's events, though only someone who knew where to look would notice. Though Mr. Morgan's horse was making quite a fuss in the stable earlier, Cole nodded slowly, reading the message beneath her casual observation. Morgan's mount, like most horses owned by violent men, had a keen sense for approaching trouble. Might want to check on them later to make sure they're comfortable. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. In 7 years of running Raven's Rest, they'd developed their own language of subtle warnings and preparations. The morning sun had just reached the frost-covered windows when heavy boots announced Morgan's descent from the upper floor. His men followed close behind, their attempts at casual postures betrayed by the predatory tension in their movements. All three had strapped on gun belts despite the early hour. "Coffee smells good," Morgan declared, claiming the same seat at the bar he'd occupied the night before. His smile was all teeth and false charm. "Hope you don't mind us getting an early start. Got a long ride ahead." Cole maintained his carefully crafted demeanor of aged servitude as he poured their coffee. "Heading north? Roads are treacherous this time of year, especially through Thunderpass." His hands shook just enough to seem natural as he set down their cups, though anyone watching closely might have noticed how those same hands never presented a clean target. "South, actually," Morgan replied, studying Cole over the rim of his cup. "Heard tell of some interesting opportunities down Broken Sage Way." The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water, ripples of tension spreading outward. Cole's hands stilled momentarily on the bar before resuming their practiced tremor. "Broken Sage? Can't say I'm familiar with it." Morgan's younger companion, the one with the broken nose, snorted in disbelief. "Man in your position, hearing things like you claimed last night, never heard of the biggest shootout in territory history?" "Now, Jimmy," Morgan chided, though his eyes never left Cole's face. "Man runs an honest inn up here in the mountains. Probably doesn't concern himself with old stories about dead men and their ghosts." His voice took on an almost scholarly tone. "Though it is quite a tale, isn't it? 6 of the territory's most wanted gunmen, all put in the ground by a single shooter. Some say he was more phantom than man, the way he moved through gun smoke like a spirit of vengeance." Cole wiped down an already clean glass, his movements maintaining their deliberate slowness. "Sounds like the kind of story that grows taller with each telling." "Maybe," Morgan agreed, "but some parts ain't just story. Like how this ghost disappeared after, leaving no trace except 6 dead men and enough mystery to keep tongues wagging. For years." He leaned forward, his casual manner slipping slightly. "Interesting thing about ghosts, though, they leave signs for those who know how to look. Little tells that mark their passing." Sarah had positioned herself near the kitchen. "D'abord," her movements seemingly focused on morning preparations while actually providing clear fields of fire. Cole caught her subtle nod. She'd already moved their most vulnerable guests to the shelter of the root cellar's hidden chamber. "Tell me what?" Cole asked, playing his role of curious but harmless innkeeper. Every second of conversation was another second to prepare, to position pieces in a game Morgan didn't realize had started the moment he'd walked through Raven's Rest's door. Like how certain men show up out of nowhere, building lives in out-of-the-way places. Morgan's dead-eyed companion had begun drifting toward the stairs, while Jimmy maintained his position near the front door. Men who know things they shouldn't, who keep their hands clean and visible, but never quite relaxed. Men who build their quiet little kingdoms with the same attention to detail that a shooter uses to plan an ambush. Cole adjusted his glasses, again using the gesture to track the positions of Morgan's men without seeming to. "Sounds like you've given this ghost of yours a lot of thought." 7 years' worth, Morgan confirmed, his facade of friendliness falling away like snow from a warming roof. "See, I had kin among those 6 dead men at Broken Sage. Man doesn't forget something like that, doesn't stop looking for answers. For justice, justice, Cole repeated softly, the word carrying echoes of old pain and older promises. Interesting word, coming from men who burn innocent families in their homes. Morgan's hand dropped to his gun, but Cole had already stepped. Back from the bar, his movement suddenly free of any pretense of age or infirmity. Careful now, Morgan warned, though something like uncertainty had crept into his expression. You're outnumbered, old man, and we've had time to study every inch of this place, have you? Cole's voice had changed, shed its carefully maintained weariness like a snake shedding its skin. You've had one night to learn Raven's Rest's secrets. I've had 7 years to build them. As if in response to his words, subtle clicks echoed. Through the common room, the sound of hidden mechanisms engaging, of carefully planned defenses sliding into place. Morgan's dead-eyed companion found his path to the stairs, suddenly blocked by a heavy oak beam that had dropped silently from above. You see, Cole continued, his hands no longer shaking at all. A man who survives something like broken sage learns to plan ahead, learns to build his sanctuary not just as a home, but as a fortress, a trap for wolves who think they're hunting sheep. Sarah had drawn both derringers with fluid grace, covering the back exit with unwavering aim. Through the windows, shapes could be seen moving in the early morning light, Marshal Evans and his deputies taking up pre-arranged positions around the inn. Ghost Hand Mason died at Broken Sage, Cole said quietly, his mild innkeeper's voice replaced by something harder and more familiar to Morgan's ears. The stories got that much right, but what rose from those ashes wasn't a ghost, just a man who learned that sometimes the best way to survive isn't to outshoot your enemies, but to outlast them, to build something so strong that when they finally track you down, they find themselves caught in a web of their own making. Morgan's smile had turned predatory, despite his increasingly precarious position. Clever setup, I'll grant you that. But you've overlooked something crucial, Ghost Hand. He raised his voice slightly, directing it toward the ceiling. Williams! Show our host what real preparation looks like. A new sound cut through the morning quiet, boots on the roof, multiple sets moving with practiced coordination. Cole's eyes narrowed behind his glasses. He'd counted 3 men with Morgan, but the footsteps above suggested at least 4 more. Through the frost-covered windows, he caught glimpses of figures rappelling down the inn's outer walls, taking positions at every possible exit. See, we did more than just study your inn last night, Morgan continued, clearly savoring the moment. Had my men slip in during the storm, while your attention was on us, found all sorts of interesting things. Up there in your rafters. Clever mechanisms, well-oiled and maintained, almost a shame to dismantle them. Cole's expression remained unchanged, but inwardly he reassessed the situation. 7 years of careful preparation, of building Raven's Rest into an impregnable fortress, and Morgan's crew had managed to compromise at least some of his defenses in a single night. The question was, how many, Papa? Sarah's voice carried a warning. More shapes had appeared in the pre-dawn gloom, horses and riders emerging from the tree line, far more than Morgan should have been able to command. Quite a ghost story you've built here, Morgan pressed his advantage. But you forgot the first rule of hunting phantoms. They're not the only ones who can gather allies. Every man out there lost someone at Broken Sage, or knows someone who did. Been tracking you for years, building our own web while you hid behind this innkeeper's mask. Cole's mind raced through calculations, through years of contingency plans and carefully prepared escapes. But each option had to account for Sarah's safety, for the innocent guests still hidden below. Running wasn't an option, not anymore, not with so many lives in the balance. 7 years is a long time, he agreed quietly, his hands resting on the bar in a way that seemed relaxed, but would allow him to reach the shotgun hidden beneath in a single motion. Long enough to build something worth protecting. Long enough to learn that some ghosts don't need to hide anymore. A sharp whistle cut through the air, a signal from Evans, warning of movement along the mountain path. More riders approaching, their identity unclear through the morning mist. Morgan's smile widened, taking on an almost manic edge. Your martial friend won't be helping this time. My men have him and his deputies pinned down at the stable. It's just us now, Ghost Hand. Time to finish what started at Broken Sage. Through the windows, the cavalry unit had begun systematically surrounding Raven's Rest, their movement speaking of long preparation and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Morgan's men on the roof had gone silent, likely realizing they were now caught between Cole's fortress and Richard's troops. Your brother wasn't just another outlaw, Morgan, Cole continued, his voice carrying the weight of long-buried truth. He was the link we needed, the man who carried messages between corrupt territorial judges and the gangs they employed. That's why he had to die at Broken Sage, why they all had to die, to protect men who wore badges and black robes while selling justice to the highest bidder. Morgan's hand remained near his gun, but uncertainty had crept into his stance. You're lying. My brother was a businessman and had contracts with the territorial government. Contracts paid in blood, Sarah interjected, her voice hard with memories of her own losses. Just like the men who killed my mother when she got too close to exposing their operation. How many other families have you destroyed, Morgan? How many other children left orphaned while you pretend to seek justice for your precious brother? The front door opened with deliberate slowness, revealing Captain Richards himself, a tall man whose cavalry uniform bore the scars of frontier service, and whose face carried the same haunted determination Cole had seen at Broken Sage. "Drop your weapons, Morgan," Richards ordered, his voice carrying the authority of both military rank and moral certainty. "Your men outside are already surrendering. It's over." But Morgan's expression had shifted from uncertainty to something darker, more desperate. "Over? You think having badges and uniforms makes you righteous? My brother died screaming Ghost Hand's name, begging for mercy that never came. You want to talk about justice?" His laugh held no humor. "Let's talk about the real reason you're all here, about what's hidden beneath this precious inn of yours." Cole's eyes narrowed behind his glasses. "Sarah, get to the cellar. Now." "Too late," Morgan's dead-eyed companion called from his position by the blocked stairs. "Found your little hidden room last night while you were all distracted by our performance up here. Interesting collection of documents you've got stored. Down there. Names, dates, bank transfers, enough evidence to hang half the territorial government, and enough black powder to send it all sky-high," Morgan added with grim satisfaction. "Dead men's testimonies don't carry much weight in court. Ghost Hand, neither do ashes." The pieces clicked together in Cole's mind. Morgan's whole approach had been a diversion, keeping attention focused upward while his men rigged the inn's foundations to burn. 7 years of gathered evidence of carefully documented corruption, all balanced on a powder keg. "You really think that's what your brother died for?" Cole asked softly, his hands still resting on the bar in that deceptively casual pose. "To protect men who saw him as nothing but a disposable tool? Men who probably ordered his death themselves when he became a liability?" Morgan's gun cleared its holster with snake-like speed, but Cole was already moving. 7 years of playing. The harmless innkeeper hadn't dulled the reflexes that had made Ghost Hand Mason a legend. His right hand swept up, glasses flying off as he dropped into the familiar dance of violence. The hidden shotgun appeared in his grip as if conjured from thin air. "Sarah, now!" he barked, and his daughter was already diving for cover as the common room erupted into chaos. Morgan's first shot shattered the mirror behind the bar, but Cole's shotgun roared in response, catching the dead-eyed man square in the chest as he tried to rush the kitchen door. Captain Richards and his cavalry had surged through both entrances, their disciplined volley dropping two of Morgan's rooftop men as they attempted to rappel through the windows. Sarah's derringers spoke twice in rapid succession, her aim as true as her father had taught her, sending Jimmy sprawling with a surprised look on his young face. But Morgan had ducked behind an overturned table, and his voice carried clear triumph despite the gun smoke filling the air. "Doesn't matter how many of us you kill, Ghost Hand, fuse is already lit. This whole place goes up, taking every shred of evidence with it." Cole's mind raced through possibilities, through years of building and planning. Every entrance to the duel cellar was rigged with Morgan's powder, every obvious route blocked, every route except Richards. He called out, dropping his empty shotgun and drawing twin Colts with the fluid grace that had spawned so many legends. "Remember what I told you about ghost stories?" The cavalry captain's eyes widened in understanding. "Sometimes the best tricks are the ones hidden in plain sight." Schedule. Cole maintained his innkeeper's facade, though his hands had shifted to provide quicker access to his hidden weapons. "Don't recall making any appointments this morning?" Morgan's laugh carried genuine amusement. 7 years you've played this game, Mason. 7 years hiding behind spectacles and grey hair, serving drinks to the very men you were gathering evidence against. He gestured toward the approaching riders. "Did you really think none of them would recognize the man who killed their brothers and sons at Broken Sage?" The inn's heavy door burst open, admitting a flood of armed men wearing a mix of territorial marshal badges and military uniforms. Their leader, a tall man with an eagle, colonel's insignia and dead eyes, stepped forward. "Marcus Cole," the colonel announced formally, "by order of Territorial Governor Harrison, you're under arrest for multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and treason against the territory." Cole's mild expression never wavered, but his mind raced through calculations. The colonel's presence confirmed his worst fears. The corruption reached higher than even he had suspected. But something else caught his attention. The way the colonel held himself, the subtle tells in his stance. "Interesting badge," Cole remarked casually. "Though I don't recall the 7th Cavalry using that particular style of eagle. Must be a recent change." The colonel's expression tightened fractionally, a tell that confirmed Cole's suspicion. These weren't military men at all, but hired guns wearing stolen uniforms. Which meant, "Sarah," Cole called out, his voice carrying a coded meaning. "Remember what your mother said about eagles?" His daughter's response was immediate. She yanked a hidden lever behind the bar, triggering mechanisms they'd spent years preparing. Steel shutters slammed down over windows, blocking the rifles of Morgan's men outside. Hidden panels in the walls slid open, revealing carefully positioned mirrors that eliminated every shadow where an assassin might hide. "Clever," Morgan admitted, but his smile remained confident. "But not clever enough. Show him, Colonel." The false officer produced a leather folder filled with documents. "Complete records of every meeting you've had here, Mason. Every secret conversation, every piece of evidence you thought you were gathering against our employers. Did you really think we'd let you spend 7 years building a case without watching your every move?" Cole's expression remained mild, but inwardly he smiled. They'd taken the bait, exactly as he and Catherine had planned before her death. "Interesting reading, I'm sure," he replied, adjusting his glasses one final time. "Though you might want to check the dates on those documents more carefully, particularly the ones from last spring." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Morgan's face. The colonel quickly opened the folder, rifling through papers with growing concern. "These are all," he began. "Forgeries," Cole finished. "Of course they are. Did you really think Catherine's death taught me nothing? Every document you've stolen, every conversation you've recorded, all carefully crafted lies designed to lead you exactly where we wanted." The sound of horses approaching echoed again, but this time from the opposite direction. Through the steel-shuttered windows came the unmistakable bugle call of genuine cavalry. "You see," Cole continued, his voice shedding its harmless innkeeper's tone like a snake shedding its skin. Ghost Hand Mason didn't die at Broken Sage. He just learned to play a longer game. Every drink I served, every story I listened to, every secret I pretended to record, all of it leading to this moment. Morgan's gun had appeared in his hand, but he suddenly looked less certain about his chances. You're bluffing. No one could maintain a deception that deep for 7 years. 7 years. Sarah's laugh carried her mother's steel. Try 12. Since before Broken Sage, since the day Papa first discovered how deep the corruption went. The shootout, his death, this inn, all part of a plan to make you reveal your own employers. Cole's hands moved with liquid grace, producing twin Colts that seemed to materialize from thin air. Those aren't just any cavalry riders out there, Morgan. That's Captain Richard's personal command. The same unit that helped fake my death at Broken Sage. The same men who've spent 7 years gathering the real evidence while you chased shadows in my inn. The false colonel's face had gone pale. Richards is dead. Everyone knows he died in the fire. Fire's an interesting thing, Cole replied softly. Burns away lies, leaves nothing but truth behind. Rather like the truth about your employers that's being delivered to every honest newspaper in the territory right now. While you were so focused on my inn, so certain you'd caught the ghost of Broken Sage, the real operation was happening right under your noses. Morgan's gun wavered slightly. Even if that's true, you're still outnumbered, still trapped in here with us. Cole's smile carried the weight of 7 years' patience, finally bearing fruit. Am I? Sarah, show our guests what your mother's architectural skills really created. His daughter touched another hidden lever. The floor beneath Morgan's men suddenly shifted, revealing carefully engineered panels that would drop them into padded cells below. The false colonel and his closest guards managed to leap clear, but over half their force vanished with startled shouts. Catherine always did have a flair for dramatic reveals, Cole remarked, his guns never wavering. Spent 3 years designing these traps right under your watch. The real question is, how many more secrets do you think Raven's Rest has left to reveal? Through the shuttered windows came the thunder of approaching cavalry, but Cole kept his attention on Morgan, on the man who thought he'd trapped a ghost, only to find himself caught in a web 7 years in the making. Your move, Cole offered, quietly. Though I should mention, those cells below, they're designed to flood if anyone gets too aggressive. Amazing what you can learn about trap design when you spend 7 years playing host to every crooked lawman in the territory. Morgan's response was cut off by a sound that made everyone freeze, the deep, resonant toll of Raven's Rest's warning. Ibel. But this wasn't Sarah's signal. This was a pattern Cole hadn't heard in 7 years, one that spoke of approaching riders under a very specific flag. The flag of the Federal Marshal's Special Investigations Division, Ghost Hand Masons. Legend was about to be reborn, but on his own terms this time. With proper authority, proper backing, and 7 years of carefully gathered evidence about to expose corruption that reached from territorial judges all the way to the governor's mansion. Morgan must have read something of this in Cole's expression, because his gun slowly lowered. All this time, he whispered, we thought we were hunting a ghost. When really, Cole finished, the ghost was haunting you. The false colonel's response was instant and violent. He fired twice at Cole, but the innkeeper was already moving, his legendary speed making the colonel's draw seem sluggish in comparison. Cole's Colts roared in perfect synchronization, one shot catching the colonel's gun hand, the other precisely striking his shoulder. I spent 7 years, Cole said quietly as the man crumpled, watching men like you practice your quick draws. In my common room, learning your tells, your preferred angles, your weaknesses. His guns shifted smoothly to cover Morgan and the remaining false marshals. Every drink I served was another lesson. Every story I listened to, another piece of intelligence. Sarah had positioned herself by the hidden control panel, her Winchester, keeping the remaining men pinned in the kill zone they'd unknowingly entered. Outside, the genuine cavalry's approach had turned into a coordinated assault. Captain Richard's voice cutting through the morning air as he directed his men to secure the perimeter. "Your problem, Morgan," Cole continued, "wasn't just underestimating me, it was underestimating Raven's Rest itself. Every beam, every floorboard, every nail was placed with purpose." He nodded toward the ceiling, where previously hidden hatches had opened to reveal mounted Gatling guns. Catherine wasn't just an architect. She was an artist of defensive design. Morgan's remaining men exchanged nervous glances, clearly reassessing their odds. Through the steel shutters came the sounds of combat, Richard's cavalry engaging the false uniforms outside. But Cole kept his attention focused on Morgan, on the man who'd thought himself the hunter, only to find himself the prey. "Tell me something," Morgan said, his voice carrying desperate curiosity. "All those meetings you hosted, all those corrupt officials and hired guns who passed through here, how many were real? How many were part of your plan?" Cole allowed himself a small smile. "Every single one. Each corrupt judge who thought he was buying information, each crooked marshal who believed he was monitoring my activities, all of them carefully fed exactly what we wanted them to know. While the real evidence," he gestured toward Sarah, who pressed another hidden control. A section of the floor rotated, revealing a massive vault door built into the bedrock beneath Raven's Rest. Morgan's eyes widened as he recognized the significance. "The territorial bank's missing gold," he whispered. "The payments, the proof of bribes, all documented, witnessed, and secured," Cole confirmed. "Every piece of evidence your employers thought they were destroying these past 7 years. Perfect copies, safely stored where even their most trusted agents couldn't reach them. Catherine's final gift to justice. A fortress disguised as an inn, designed to protect truth rather than gold." The sound of boots on the stairs announced the arrival of the federal marshals, led by a face Morgan clearly recognized from wanted posters. Marshal James Hangman Hayes, the legendary investigator who'd broken the Kansas City corruption ring 5 years earlier. "Marcus," Hayes called out, using Cole's chosen name rather than his legend. "Richards has the perimeter secured. Federal warrants are being served across the territory as we speak. Judge Harrison, Governor McKinley, all of them." Cole nodded, slowly keeping his Colts trained on Morgan. "And the newspapers, running the story now, every major publication from here to Washington. The evidence your wife gathered, the connections she uncovered. It's all going public. No one can bury this anymore." Morgan's gun clattered to the floor as the full weight of his situation finally hit him. "All this time," he whispered, "we thought the ghost was just seeking revenge." "Revenge is easy," Cole corrected him. "Justice, real justice, takes patience, takes planning, take good people willing to sacrifice everything to see it done right." His voice softened slightly. "Your brother understood that at the end. Why do you think he really died at Broken Sage?" Understanding dawned in Morgan's eyes. He wasn't just another corrupt agent, was he? He was working with you. "Until Harrison's men discovered his change of heart," Cole confirmed. "He died trying to get evidence to Catherine, trying to make right some of what he'd helped corrupt men do. That's the truth I've been protecting all these years. Not just evidence of corruption, but proof that even men like your brother could find their way back to justice." Sarah's Winchester hadn't wavered, but her voice carried pride as she addressed Morgan. "That's what Raven's Rest really is. Not just a trap for corrupt men, but a testament to good men who lost their way and found it again. Every stone, every beam, every hidden mechanism, all of it built to protect that truth." The federal marshals had begun securing Morgan's remaining men, but Cole kept his attention on the man himself. 7 years ago, you swore to hunt down your brother's killer, to avenge his death at Ghost Hand Mason's hands. But the real killer is sitting in the governor's mansion, wearing respectability, like a mask, while he corrupts everything justice stands for. The question is, Hayes added, producing a set of papers, are you ready to help us finish what your brother started? These are witness papers already signed by a federal judge. Tell us everything you know about Harrison's operation. Help us. Make this case airtight, and you can be part of making things right. Morgan looked around the common room of Raven's Rest, seeing it with new eyes, not just as an inn that had harbored a legend, but as a fortress built to protect the very idea of justice itself. His gaze settled on Cole, on the man who'd spent 7 years playing a role while building something far greater than mere vengeance. My brother, he said quietly, the night before Broken Sage, he told me he'd discovered something that would change everything. Said sometimes a man had to die in his old life to be reborn in truth. A bitter laugh escaped him. Thought he was drunk, talking nonsense. Never realized he was trying to tell me about this, about you. Cole's response was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, not military this time, but the unmistakable gait of news riders coming to document the fall of a corrupt empire and the rebirth of a legend. Ghost Hand Mason's story was about to become public again, but this time it would be a tale of justice rather than vengeance, of patience rather than violence. Your brother's last words, Cole said softly, were about hope. About believing that truth would eventually win out over corruption if good men were willing to fight for it the right way. He lowered his Colt slowly, deliberately. Time to choose your path, Morgan. Time to decide if you're going to help us finish what he started or die protecting the men who really killed him. Through Raven's Rest's frost-covered windows, dawn painted the mountains in colors of revelation and rebirth. The ghost of Broken Sage had finally stopped haunting the territories, replaced by something far more powerful. The living truth of justice served cold, but served right, with Morgan's men secured and the federal marshals establishing control of Raven's Rest's perimeter. Cole led Marshal Hayes and a select few down into the inn's hidden heart. The vault door opened with a complex series of mechanisms, each turn of the key revealing new layers of Catherine's genius. My wife, Cole explained as they descended the torchlit stairs, spent 3 years designing these chambers. Said if we were going to trap corrupt men, we needed a proper cage to hold their secrets. His voice carried both pride and old pain. Every level has its own purpose, its own story to tell. The first chamber took Hayes' breath away. Floor to ceiling, shelves held hundreds of leather-bound ledgers, each meticulously labeled and cross-referenced. Financial records, Sarah explained, running her fingers along the spines. Every bribe, every payoff, every piece of blood money that passed through the territories. Mama had a gift for following paper trails. More than that, Cole added, moving to a specific shelf. She could see patterns others missed. Notice how these ledgers are arranged, not by date or amount, but by connection. Each row tells a story of corruption, if you know how to read it. Hayes picked up one volume, his experienced eyes widening at its contents. These aren't just territorial transactions. These go all the way to Washington. Railroad contracts, land deals, military supplies. Keep going, Cole encouraged, leading them deeper into the vault. That's just the surface level. The second chamber was smaller but more sophisticated. Glass cases housed carefully preserved documents, letters, and photographs. The personal evidence, Sarah explained, her voice tight with memory. Correspondence between corrupt officials, blackmail material they used against each other, proof of their private crimes. Cole stopped at one particular case, containing a single bullet, in a velvet-lined box. Found this the day Catherine died. matched it to Judge Harrison's personal revolver, the one he claims was stolen years ago. Keep it here, waiting for the right moment. The third level made even the hardened federal marshal pause. The walls were covered in intricate diagrams, maps and flowing charts that connected hundreds of names and events across decades of territorial history. Catherine's masterpiece, Cole said softly. She called it the web of truth. Every corrupt judge, every bought lawman, every crooked politician, all connected to their crimes, their conspirators, their victims. 7 years of evidence gathering, all leading to this moment. Hayes studied the nearest section with growing amazement. This isn't just about Harrison and his immediate circle. This maps out corruption across 3 territories, showing connections we never even suspected. The railroad massacres, the land grant frauds, the missing military supplies. It's all connected. Because it was never just about individual crimes. Sarah explained, touching a particular cluster of names. Mama discovered they were building something bigger. A shadow empire, using the territory's expansion as cover for their real operation. Cole's voice carried the weight of 7 years' patience. They called themselves the Territorial Investment Consortium. Legitimate on the surface, bankers, judges, business leaders all working to develop the frontier. But their real business was power, control, using violence and corruption to shape the territories into their private kingdom. And Broken Sage, Hayes asked, studying the section of the wall dedicated to that bloody day. Where does that fit? It was supposed to be their masterstroke. Cole's hands clenched briefly at the memory. They'd gathered their most violent enforcers, their most corrupt lawmen, all in one place, planning to eliminate any honest marshals who'd gotten too close to the truth. But they didn't count on Catherine, having already documented everything, didn't expect Ghost Hand Mason to be working with the very people they were trying to eliminate. Sarah moved to another section of the wall, where photographs and witness statements told the story of her mother's final days. Mama knew they were closing in, knew they'd discovered she was gathering evidence. That's why she accelerated the construction of these vaults, why she spent her last weeks making sure every piece of evidence was properly preserved and connected. The night she died, Cole continued, his voice carrying an edge of old grief. She'd finally found the link we needed, proof that Harrison himself had ordered the Broken Sage massacre, trying to cover up his connection to the railroad land grabs. She managed to hide her final notes here before they caught her. Hayes examined the intricate diagrams with growing understanding, so Raven's Rest wasn't just a trap for corrupt men. It was a monument to your wife's work, a fortress built to protect the truth she died discovering. More than that, Cole replied, leading them to the vault's final chamber. It was her gift to justice itself. Every beam, every stone, every hidden mechanism, all designed to ensure that when the truth finally came out, no power in the territories could bury it again. The last room was smaller than the others, but its contents made Hayes inhale sharply. A single desk dominated the space, its surface covered with freshly printed newspapers. Headlines screamed of corruption exposed, of territorial officials arrested, of an empire of greed finally crumbling. Catherine's final victory, Sarah said softly. Every newspaper in the territories is running the story simultaneously, using evidence we've spent 7 years gathering. No way for them to suppress it now, no way to silence the truth. Cole picked up one paper, its ink still fresh. Ghost Hand Mason's legend bought us the time we needed. Let them think they were hunting a vengeful spirit, while we built something stronger than vengeance, something that would last. Hayes studied the man before him, not the mild-mannered innkeeper, not the legendary gunfighter, but something more complex and powerful than either. You could have just killed them all, he observed. Your reputation, your skill, you could have eliminated every corrupt official one by one. Killing is easy, Cole replied, his voice carrying the wisdom of hard experience. Justice, real justice, that's the harder path. Catherine understood that. Taught me that the true measure of a man isn't how many enemies he can kill, but how many truths he can protect. The sound of boots on the stairs announced the arrival of Captain Richards. Federal warrants are being served across the territories, he reported. Harrison, McKinley, all their major conspirators. They're being taken into custody as we speak, and the newspapers are doing their job, Cole finished. Truth has a power all its own, once it's properly armed and armored. He gestured to the vaults around them. Catherine built these chambers to be a fortress for justice. Now it's time to throw open the gates. Let every citizen of the territories see exactly what kind of men have been ruling them. Morgan's voice drifted down from above, where he was cooperating with the federal marshals. All these years, they heard him say, we thought we were hunting a ghost. Never realized the ghost was building something bigger than any of us. Hayes turned to Cole, curiosity burning in his eyes. After this, after the truth is out and justice is served, what happens to Ghost Hand Mason, to Marcus Cole? Cole's smile carried both wisdom and peace. Ghosts fade when their work is done. But the truth? Truth lives on in the foundations we build, in the justice we serve, in the legacy we leave for others to follow. He looked at his daughter, seeing Catherine's strength in her stance. Raven's Rest was never meant to be just an inn, or even just a fortress. It was meant to be a beacon, showing other good men and women that justice is possible if you're willing to fight for it the right way. Through the vault's thick walls came the sound of more riders arriving. Honest lawmen, newspaper reporters, citizens drawn by the growing story of corruption exposed and justice restored. The ghost of Broken Sage had finished its work, but Marcus Cole's truth was just beginning to shine. Sarah moved to one of the vault's side chambers, unlocking a hidden panel to reveal an array of photographic equipment. "Show them, Papa," she encouraged. "Show them what else Mama left us." Cole nodded slowly, approaching the equipment with reverent care. Catherine didn't just document their crimes with paper and ink, he explained, lifting a specially modified camera. She found ways to capture truth that even corrupt judges couldn't deny. The photographs spread across the table told their own devastating story. Corrupt officials accepting bribes in broad daylight, confident that no one would dare document their crimes. Secret meetings between judges and known outlaws, captured through specially designed lenses. Even Harrison himself, photographed, signing the orders that had led to the Broken Sage massacre. "Your wife was an artist with more than just architecture," Hayes observed, studying the technical sophistication of the equipment. These modifications, the way she adapted the cameras for long-range work, "She learned from the best," Cole replied. "Spent 2 years apprenticing with Matthew Brady himself after the war, learning how to capture truth in silver and glass. Said a photograph was like a bullet. Had to know exactly how to aim it to hit your target." Another hidden panel revealed Catherine's personal journals, each page filled with detailed observations and technical notes. "She documented everything," Sarah explained, her voice carrying pride mixed with old pain. "Not just the evidence itself, but how to preserve it, protect it, present it in ways that would stand up in any court." "More than that," Cole added, turning to a specific page. "She built redundancies into everything. Every piece of evidence exists in multiple forms, stored in different locations across the territories. Even if they'd managed to destroy Raven's Rest, the truth would have survived." Hayes examined a particular series of photographs with growing amazement. "These show the whole network, how they moved money, how they communicated, how they enforced their will. Must have taken years to compile." 7 years of patience, Cole confirmed. 7 years of playing the harmless innkeeper, while Catherine's cameras captured every secret meeting, every backroom deal, every moment of corruption they thought was safely hidden. The sound of activity from above had grown louder. More. Federal marshals arriving, more evidence being catalogued, more pieces of Catherine's great work, finally seeing the light of day. But in the vault's secure depths, Cole focused on a single photograph he'd kept close for 7 years. It showed Catherine in her workshop, surrounded by the tools of her trade, cameras and architectural drawings, ledgers and legal documents. But it was her expression that caught Hayes's attention, the fierce determination in her eyes as she worked to expose corruption that had poisoned 3 territories. "The night she died," Cole said softly, "she told me something I've carried ever since. Said that ghosts might haunt the guilty, but truth haunts everyone who encounters it. Can't be killed, can't be buried, can't be burned away. It just waits, patient as stone, until the right moment to emerge." Sarah touched the photograph gently. "That's why she designed Raven's Rest the way she did. Not just as a fortress to protect evidence, but as a monument to the idea that truth itself is the strongest weapon against corruption." "And now?" Hayes asked, gesturing to the wealth of evidence surrounding them. "With the truth finally exposed, with Harrison and his conspirators facing justice, what becomes of all this?" Cole's smile carried both satisfaction and purpose. Catherine had plans for that too. These vaults, this equipment, all the methods she developed for gathering and protecting evidence. They're not just for one case. She designed Raven's Rest to be a permanent institution, a place where other brave souls could learn to fight corruption the right way. A school, Sarah added, for a different kind of justice. Not just law enforcement, but truth enforcement. Teaching others how to gather evidence, build cases, expose corruption that thinks itself too powerful to touch. The implications made Hayes whistle softly. The Territorial Investment Consortium isn't the only corrupt organization out there. Others will rise to take its place. And when they do, Cole finished, they'll find more than just Ghost Hand Mason waiting for them. They'll face a new generation of guardians, armed with Catherine's methods and dedicated to her vision of justice. Through the vault's thick walls came the sound of change sweeping across the territories, corrupt officials being arrested, honest citizens coming forward with their own evidence, a system of injustice finally crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. "Your brother," Cole said quietly to Morgan, who had joined them in the vault's depths, "died trying to protect Catherine's work, tried to warn us the night before Broken Sage that Harrison's men had discovered what she was building here. His last act was to buy us time to secure the evidence, to ensure the truth would survive, even if we didn't." Morgan touched one of the photographs reverently, an image of his brother meeting secretly with Catherine, passing her documents that would help expose the corruption they both fought. "All this time," he whispered, "I thought I was avenging his death, never realized I was fighting against everything he died protecting. Vengeance is a ghost that never finds rest," Cole replied. "But the truth? Truth is a foundation you can build on, a legacy that outlives any single person." He gestured to the vault around them, to 7 years of patient work finally bearing fruit. "That's what Catherine understood, what your brother died protecting, not just evidence of past crimes, but hope for future justice." The sound of hammering from above announced workers removing the false walls and panels that had hidden Raven's Rest's true nature for so long. Ghost Hand Mason's legend had served its purpose, buying time for Catherine's greater work to take root. Now it was time for a different kind of legend to emerge, not one built on gunsmoke and vengeance, but on the patient, powerful truth that no corruption could forever hide from. As evening approached Raven's Rest, the initial chaos of arrests and revelations had settled into purposeful activity. Federal marshals processed evidence from the vaults, while honest territorial officials, summoned by Hayes, began the massive task of untangling 7 years of documented corruption. But in the inn's kitchen, away from the official proceedings, Cole faced a more personal reckoning. "You knew my father, didn't you?" Sarah asked quietly, heating coffee for the workers who'd been laboring since dawn. "Before Broken Sage, before you became Marcus Cole, you knew Thomas Sullivan." Cole's hands stilled on the cup he'd been drying. In the aftermath of Catherine's death, he'd adopted Sarah not just out of duty to his late wife, but because the girl had reminded him so much of another victim of Harrison's corruption. He'd never told her the full truth about her father, about the role Thomas Sullivan had played in setting Ghost Hand Mason on his path. "Your father," Cole said carefully, "was the most honest lawman I ever knew. Back when I was still riding as a federal marshal myself, before Ghost Hand Mason became a legend, Thomas Sullivan taught me what real justice looked like." Sarah's copper hair caught the lamplight as she turned to face him. "The night Mama died, I heard her talking about him, said something about how it all started with his murder, how you'd promised him—" 7 years before Broken Sage, Cole confirmed, setting down the cup before it could betray the tremor in his hands. "Your father was investigating land fraud along the railroad expansion, found evidence linking territorial judges to forced evictions, to murders disguised as Indian raids. He brought his findings to me and asked for federal help in building a case." Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. "That's why you were really at Broken Sage, not just as Ghost Hand Mason, but as the federal marshal my father had trusted with his evidence. Harrison's men killed him before we could make the case. Public," Cole's voice carried the weight of old guilt, "made it look like a random robbery gone wrong. But Thomas had been smarter than they knew. He'd already hidden copies of everything he'd discovered, left clues that only another lawman would recognize." The kitchen door opened quietly, admitting Hayes and Captain Richards. They'd clearly been listening, adding new pieces to their understanding of the legend they'd helped create. "Those clues," Hayes said softly, "they led you to Catherine, didn't they? To what she was already building here at Raven's Rest." Cole nodded slowly. Thomas had discovered her work independently and had been helping her document the corruption, spreading through the territories. When he died, he left me a message, not just about the evidence, but about his daughter, about a brave young girl who might need protection once his enemies realized how much she'd seen. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee, memories of that night clearly playing behind her eyes. "I was 12, she whispered, hiding in Papa's office when they came. Heard everything. How Judge Harrison himself gave the order. How they laughed about making it look like just another frontier tragedy. You hid the evidence they were looking for," Cole prompted gently. "Just like your father had taught you. Kept it safe until Catherine could retrieve it. And then I ran." Sarah's voice carried old shame. "Ran while they murdered him, while they burned our home to hide their crimes. Some lawman's daughter I turned out to be." "You survived," Cole corrected firmly. "Survived, and made your way to Catherine, just like your father had planned, brought her the final pieces of evidence she needed to start building her case against Harrison's whole operation." Richards shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't know about the girl," he admitted. "When we helped fake your death at Broken Sage, gave you the cover to become Marcus Cole, we thought it was just about gathering evidence. Never realized you were protecting Thomas Sullivan's legacy in more ways than one." Catherine understood. "Immediately," Cole replied, his voice softening at the memory. "The moment Sarah arrived at Raven's Rest, half dead from exposure, but still clutching her father's evidence, Catherine knew we had to protect her. Not just her life, but her father's dream of exposing the corruption that was poisoning the territories." "So you became Marcus Cole," Hayes mused. "The harmless innkeeper, raising his wife's daughter from her previous marriage. The perfect cover for continuing Thomas Sullivan's work, for teaching his daughter everything he hadn't lived to share himself." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "All these years, I thought you were just being kind, taking in an orphan, teaching me to shoot, to gather evidence, to fight corruption the smart way instead of the easy way. I made a promise to your father, Cole said quietly. The night before he died, he told me something I've carried ever since. Said that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent, about teaching the next generation to stand against corruption, no matter how powerful it becomes. The kitchen door opened again, admitting Morgan. The former outlaw had spent hours cooperating with the federal marshals, sharing everything he knew about Harrison's operation. But now he faced Sarah with evident difficulty. I knew your father, too, he admitted. Not well, but he tried to help my brother near the end. Offered him a chance to testify against Harrison, to help expose the corruption before it was too late. Morgan's voice caught slightly. My brother refused, thinking he was too deep in it to ever find redemption. But your father, he said something I've never forgotten, said it's never too late to stand for truth, even if you have to stand alone. Sarah studied Morgan for a long moment, seeing past the outlaw to the man beneath. Papa, my real father, he used to say that justice is like a torch. Sometimes one person has to hold it alone, but its light shows others the way to stand. With them, Cole felt pride mixed with old pain as he watched his adopted daughter, Thomas Sullivan's daughter, extend forgiveness to one of the men who'd hunted them for so long. Your father would be proud, he said softly. Not just of your skill with evidence and investigation, but of your understanding of what justice really means. Through the kitchen windows came the sound of more riders arriving, honest lawmen from across the territories, drawn by the growing story of corruption exposed and justice restored. But in the warm sanctuary of Raven's Rest's kitchen, Ghost, Handmaid's legend, was giving way to something more powerful. The legacy of Thomas Sullivan, carried forward by his daughter and the man who'd kept his final promise. 7 years, Sarah mused, her hand finding Cole's work-roughened fingers. 7 years of playing roles, of gathering evidence, of building something bigger than revenge. Papa would have loved seeing this day. He sees it, Cole assured her, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Through you, through everything you've learned, through every piece of corruption you've helped expose. The torch he carried, that your mother Catherine carried, it burns brighter than ever in your hands. Hayes watched this exchange with growing understanding. Ghost Hand Mason's legend had served its purpose, buying time for something far more important to take root. A family forged not by blood but by shared dedication to justice, a legacy stronger than any single person's vengeance. The newspaper headlines tomorrow will tell a story of corruption exposed, the federal marshal observed, of Ghost Hand Mason's return, of Catherine Cole's brilliant trap, of Harrison's empire finally crumbling. But the real story, Cole finished, is about a father's love, a mother's genius, and a daughter's courage. About how 3 different dreams of justice came together under one roof, creating something stronger than any corrupt empire could ever build. Sarah's smile carried echoes of both her fathers, Thomas Sullivan's determination and Marcus Cole's patience. Raven's Rest was never just an inn, she said softly. It was a promise to my father, to Mama, to everyone who's ever stood alone against corruption. A promise that truth may be patient, but it never stops hunting those who think themselves above justice. As night settled over the mountains, Raven's Rest's windows glowed with lamplight, no longer hiding secrets, but illuminating truth for all to see. The ghost of broken sage could finally rest, its work completed not through violence, but through the patient strength of family bonds forged in adversity and tempered by unwavering dedication to justice. As the kitchen grew quiet, Morgan cleared his throat of uncertainty. There's something else you should know, Miss Sullivan, about your father's last night, He withdrew a weathered envelope from his coat. "My brother. He left this with me, said to deliver it if anything happened to him. I've carried it all. These years, never understanding its true importance until now." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she took the envelope. Inside was a letter, its pages yellow with age, but the writing still clear. Thomas Sullivan's final message to his daughter. "My dearest Sarah," she read aloud, her voice catching. "If you're reading this, then what I feared has come to pass. Harrison's men have discovered our work, and I may not survive to see justice done. But know this, everything I did, every risk I took, was to build a better world for you." Cole moved closer, offering silent support as Sarah continued reading. Her father's last words, "The man who brings you this letter, Ghost Hand Mason, is more than just a legend. He's the finest lawman I've ever known. A man who understands that true justice requires more than just a fast gun. Trust him, learn from him, and know that in protecting you, he's keeping a promise that goes beyond mere duty." Morgan's voice was soft with revelation. "My brother knew. All this time he knew Mason, what you were really doing here." "There's more," Sarah whispered, turning the page. "Papa writes about Mama too, about Catherine. Your mother was already building something remarkable when I met her," she read. "Not just an inn, but a fortress for truth itself. She understands, as I do, that corruption thrives in darkness, but withers in the light of documented fact. The evidence I've gathered, the connections I've mapped, they're only part of a larger tapestry she's weaving." Hayes moved to the window, watching federal marshals continuing their work in the growing darkness. Thomas Sullivan wasn't just gathering evidence against Harrison. He was helping Catherine create a new kind of justice, one built on irrefutable proof rather than force of arms. The final paragraphs, Sarah's voice grew stronger as she read, they're about legacy, about hope. She straightened, channeling her father's strength through his written words. "My precious daughter, by the time you read this, you may have already found your way to Raven's Rest, to Catherine, to Mason, to the future we're fighting to build. Don't waste time mourning what Harrison's men may take from me. Focus instead on what they can never destroy, the truth we've gathered, the foundation we've laid for real justice in these territories." Cole's hand found Sarah's shoulder, steadying her as she read the final lines. "Remember always that a Sullivan never breaks faith with justice, never stops fighting corruption, no matter how powerful it becomes. In Mason and Catherine, you'll find not just protectors, but teachers. They'll show you how to turn evidence into armor, truth into weapons sharper than any bullet. And most importantly," Sarah's voice carried both tears and triumph, "know that I love you with all my heart. That everything I've built, every piece of evidence I've gathered, is part of your inheritance. Not just papers and proof, but a calling higher than any badge, more lasting than any legend." The kitchen fell silent as Sarah carefully folded the letter, tucking it close to her heart. But it was Morgan who finally spoke, his voice heavy with understanding. "Your father, my brother, Ghost Hand Mason, they were all part of something bigger than any of us knew, not just fighting corruption, but building a new way to ensure justice survives, a way that depends on more than legends and gunsmoke," Cole agreed quietly. "One that requires patience, intelligence, and the kind of courage that stands strongest in silence." Through Raven's Rest's windows came the sound of more arrivals. Newspaper editors summoned by Hayes to document the evidence. Honest judges, they called to witness truth's triumph over corruption. But in the kitchen's warm sanctuary, a different kind of victory was being celebrated. 7 years, Sarah mused, touching the letter again. 7 years of building on Papa's foundation, extending Mama Catherine's web of truth, learning from the man who kept his promise to protect not just my life, but my father's dream. Cole's smile carried both pride and purpose. Thomas Sullivan's legacy lives in more than just papers and proof. It lives in you, Sarah, in every skill you've mastered, every piece of corruption you've helped expose, every step you've taken toward becoming the kind of guardian these territories truly need. Hayes nodded slowly, understanding at last the full scope of what had been built within Raven's Rest's walls. Not just a trap for corrupt men, he observed, but a training ground for a new generation of justice seekers, people who fight with evidence rather than bullets, who understand that the most powerful weapon against corruption is documented truth. As night settled more deeply over the mountains, Raven's Rest's windows glowed with new purpose. The legend of Ghost Hand Mason had served its role, buying time for Thomas Sullivan's greater legacy to take root and flourish. Now, in his daughter's determined stance and Cole's patient guidance, that legacy was blooming into something even Harrison's corrupt empire could never have imagined. A force for justice that would outlast any single legend, surviving in the hearts and minds of those who understood that truth, properly protected and patiently deployed, was the strongest weapon of all. Deep in Raven's Rest's hidden chambers, Cole unlocked a door that hadn't been opened in 7 years. The room beyond was small, illuminated by a single oil lamp that cast dancing shadows across walls covered in wanted posters, maps, and faded photographs. This was Ghost Hand Mason's sanctuary, preserved exactly as it had been the day he'd supposedly died at Broken Sage. Never showed this to anyone, Cole admitted, as Hayes and Sarah followed him inside. Not even Catherine knew about every secret. This room holds. His hands moved with practiced familiarity over an old gun belt hanging on the wall, its leather worn smooth by years of use before being retired to this shrine of memory. Sarah's eyes were drawn to a particular photograph, a group of federal marshals posed formally outside a territorial courthouse. Her father, Thomas Sullivan, stood proud in his badge and boots. Beside him, a younger version of Cole, before. Ghost Hand Mason's legend had been born. This was taken the day everything changed, Cole explained, touching the photographer's worn edges. The day your father first discovered evidence linking Judge Harrison to the railroad massacres. We were so young then, so certain that justice would prevail if we just followed the law. Hayes studied the other faces in the photograph. I recognize some of these men. They disappeared over the years. Accidents, random violence, frontier. Justice gone wrong, except they weren't accidents at all, were they? Harrison's cleanup crew, Cole confirmed grimly. Every marshal who got too close to the truth, every lawman who couldn't be bought, they all met with accidents that kept getting written off as routine frontier violence. The room held other ghosts too. Newspaper clippings documenting the rise of Ghost Hand Mason's legend, carefully preserved witness statements that had never seen the light of day, bullets in glass cases that told stories of survival against impossible odds. The night your father died, Cole continued, his voice heavy with memory, he'd finally gathered enough evidence to expose Harrison's whole operation. Had proof of judges taking bribes, of territorial officials ordering massacres disguised as Indian raids, of an entire system built on corruption and blood money. Sarah moved to a particular collection of documents, her hands trembling slightly as she recognized her father's handwriting. This was his final report, wasn't it? The one that got him killed. Cole nodded slowly. Harrison's men thought they'd destroyed every copy. Never knew your father had already hidden the original here, in a room only another federal marshal would know how to find. But why keep it hidden? Hayes asked, examining the evidence that could have exposed Harrison's corruption years ago. Why wait 7 years to bring it to light? Because Thomas understood something crucial, Cole replied, moving to a locked cabinet in the corner. Something Catherine figured out too, before the end. Exposing corruption isn't enough. You have to be ready for what happens after, have to build something strong enough to survive the fallout. The cabinet opened to reveal stacks of journals, each filled with Catherine's precise handwriting. "Your mother," Cole told Sarah. "She took your father's evidence and started mapping connections, found links between Harrison's operation and corrupt officials across 3 territories, realized we weren't just fighting a few corrupt judges. We were up against an entire shadow empire." Sarah picked up one journal, its pages filled with architectural drawings of Raven's Rest's hidden chambers. "This is dated before Broken Sage. Mama was already building this place, wasn't she? Already preparing for what was coming." "Catherine was always 3 steps ahead," Cole confirmed, pride mixing with old pain in his voice. "She knew Harrison's men would eventually track us down, try to destroy the evidence we were gathering. So she designed Raven's Rest, not just as a fortress, but as a trap, a place where corrupt men would feel safe, revealing their secrets, never realizing every word was being documented, every meeting recorded." Hayes examined the architectural plans with growing appreciation. The inn's layout, the carefully positioned mirrors, the hidden observation points, it's all designed to gather evidence without alerting the targets. "More than that," Cole added, opening another cabinet to reveal specialized photographic equipment. Catherine modified these cameras herself, creating ways to document meetings and transactions that even corrupt judges couldn't deny. Every piece of evidence in our vaults was gathered using her methods, her innovations. But it was a simple leather journal that caught Sarah's attention. Her father's personal diary, preserved in this sanctuary of truth. As she read, tears filled her eyes. "He knew," she whispered. "Months before they killed him, Papa knew what was coming. Listen to this entry. Harrison's empire runs deeper than we imagined, not just corruption, but a deliberate attempt to shape the territories through violence and fear. They'll come for me soon, but thanks to Mason and Catherine, the truth will survive. My daughter will survive, carrying forward the work we've begun." Cole moved to comfort her, but Sarah's grief had already transformed into something stronger, determination worthy of both her fathers. "This room," she said quietly, "it's not just about preserving the past, is it? It's about teaching the future, showing others how to fight corruption the right way." "Your father understood that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty," Cole agreed. "It's about building something that outlasts any single person, any single fight. That's why he documented everything so carefully, why Catherine designed Raven's Rest to be more than just a fortress." Hayes had been examining a particular set of photographs, images that captured Ghost Hand Mason's legendary last stand at Broken Sage. But now he saw them with new eyes, understanding the elaborate deception that had been staged that day. Shootout, your supposed death. It was all orchestrated, wasn't it? A way to buy time while you build something stronger than any legend. Cole's smile carried both pride and purpose. Ghost Hand Mason had to die so Marcus Cole could live, had to give us the freedom to gather evidence, build cases, create something that would survive even after Harrison's men thought they'd won. Through the room's thick walls came the sound of justice being served. Federal marshals processing, prisoners, honest judges reviewing evidence that would reshape the territories. But in this sanctuary of memory, Ghost Hand Mason's legend was giving way to something more powerful, the legacy of truth that had survived 7 years of patient waiting. "Your father's last words to me," Cole told Sarah softly, "were about hope. About believing that truth, properly protected and patiently deployed, would eventually overcome any corruption. That's what this room represents. Not just memories of what was lost, but proof that justice, real justice, never dies. It just waits for the right moment to emerge." As they prepared to leave the sanctuary, Sarah paused at the photograph of her father and the young Cole. 7 years of playing roles, she mused, of gathering evidence, of building something bigger than revenge. Papa would be proud of what we've created here. He sees it, Cole assured her, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Through you, through everything you've learned, through every piece of corruption you've helped expose. The torch he carried, that your mother Catherine carried, it burns brighter than ever in your hands. The room's single lamp cast their shadows on walls that held 7 years of patient justice, of truth preserved against corruption's dark tide. Ghost Hand Mason's legend had served its purpose, buying time for something far more important to take root, a legacy of justice that would outlast any single person's vengeance. Surviving in the hearts and minds of those who understood that truth, properly protected and patiently deployed, was the strongest weapon of all. A worn leather trunk in the corner caught Hayes's attention. "What's this?" he asked, noting the careful way Cole approached it. "Catherine's final project," Cole replied, unlocking the trunk with a key he wore around his neck. Something she was working on the night they killed her, something that made Harrison's men desperate enough to risk exposing their whole operation. Inside lay a collection of daguerreotypes unlike anything Hayes had ever seen. Using techniques she'd developed herself, Catherine had created photographic evidence that went beyond mere images. Detailed records of secret meetings, hidden transactions and confidential documents that Harrison's empire had thought safely destroyed. "Look at this one," Sarah breathed, lifting a particularly detailed plate. "It shows Judge Harrison himself meeting with the men who later attacked Papa. The date stamp proves he ordered the hit." Catherine's genius wasn't just in taking the photographs, Cole explained, carefully handling each plate. It was in developing ways to authenticate them, to prove beyond any doubt when and where each image was captured. She called it truth made permanent, evidence that couldn't be destroyed or denied. The trunk contained other innovations too, specially modified lenses that could capture clear images through Raven's Rest's carefully positioned mirrors, chemical processes that preserved details other photographers missed, methods for documenting conversations that corrupt officials thought safely private. The night they came for her, Cole's voice carried old pain, Catherine had just finished documenting a meeting between Harrison and the territorial governor, had proof they were planning to use the railroad expansion to seize land from honest settlers, to build their corrupt empire on stolen property and spilled blood. Sarah lifted another plate, this one showing her mother at work in her hidden laboratory. "I remember this night," she said softly. "Mama was so excited, said she'd finally found a way to make truth stronger than power." "That's what got her killed," Hayes observed grimly. "Not just gathering evidence, but finding ways to make it undeniable, creating tools that would let others expose corruption long after she was gone." Cole nodded slowly, touching a final compartment in the trunk's lid. "This was her masterpiece," he said, withdrawing a small journal filled with technical notes and chemical formulas, complete instructions for everything she developed, her photographic techniques, her authentication methods, her ways of preserving evidence that corrupt men thought they'd destroyed. "A legacy," Sarah whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Not just evidence against Harrison, but tools for fighting corruption wherever it appears." "Your mother believed that truth needs more than just protectors," Cole confirmed. "It needs innovators, people willing to develop new ways to document and preserve evidence. That's what Raven's Rest was really built for. Not just as a fortress for justice, but as a laboratory for developing new weapons in the fight against corruption." Through the walls came the sound of hoofbeats. More federal marshals arriving, drawn by the growing story of Harrison's empire exposed. But in this sanctuary of memory and innovation, Cole focused on Catherine's final gift to justice. "The night she died," he told Sarah softly, "your mother made me promise something. said that Ghost Hand Mason's legend had served its purpose, buying time for her to develop these techniques. But the future belonged to people like you, people who would use her innovations to fight corruption not with guns, but with undeniable truth. Hayes examined the photographic equipment with growing appreciation. These methods, these techniques, they could revolutionize how we build cases against corrupt officials. No more relying just on witness testimony or paper trails that can be destroyed. That's what Harrison feared most, Cole agreed. Not Ghost Hand Mason's guns, but Catherine's ability to create evidence that couldn't be buried or denied. Truth that would outlast any attempt to suppress it. Sarah's fingers traced her mother's handwriting in the technical journal. All these years, she mused, I thought we were just gathering evidence. Never realized we were also perfecting tools that would help others expose corruption long after. Harrison's empire fell. The sanctuary's single lamp cast new shadows as Cole carefully repacked Catherine's innovations. Ghost Hand, Mason's legend had bought them the time they needed, but the future belonged to Catherine's legacy, to the tools and techniques she'd developed for making truth permanent, undeniable, stronger than any corrupt empire's attempts. To bury it. Your mother used to say, Cole told Sarah, that legends fade but truth properly preserved grows stronger with time. Everything in this room, the evidence, the innovations, the tools she developed, it's all part of your inheritance. Not just proof against Harrison, but weapons for continuing the fight long after his empire crumbles. Through Raven's Rest's walls came the sound of justice being served, of corrupt officials facing evidence they couldn't deny or destroy. But in this sanctuary of memory and innovation, something even more powerful was being passed on. Not just Catherine's proof against Harrison's empire, but her tools for ensuring that truth would always have new guardians, new innovators, new ways to shine light into corruption's darkest corners. As midnight approached Raven's Rest, Marshal Hayes burst into the kitchen where Cole and Sarah were, reviewing evidence files. His face carried news that made even Ghost Hand Mason's composure slip. Harrison's escaped federal custody, Hayes announced grimly. 3 of his most loyal judges are missing too. And the governor? He paused, letting the implications sink in. The governor's just declared martial law across the territory. Cole's hands stilled on the documents he'd been organizing. They're making their play, he said quietly, using official authority to try to bury everything we've exposed. Sarah moved to the window, watching as emergency beacon fires began appearing on distant peaks, the territory's ancient warning system coming alive with dark purpose. They're mobilizing militia units, she observed. Under martial law, they could claim everything we've gathered is a threat to territorial security. Worse than that, Hayes added, spreading out an urgent dispatch that had just arrived. Harrison's judges have issued warrants for everyone involved in exposing their operation. They're painting us as conspirators, trying to destabilize the territory. Cole's response was interrupted by the thunder of approaching horses. Through the frost-covered windows, they could see torch-bearing riders approaching Raven's Rest from multiple directions. But these weren't federal marshals or honest lawmen. These were territorial militia, led by men wearing judges' badges that gleamed with false authority. 7 years of patience, Cole mused, his voice carrying a dangerous calm. And they think they can bury the truth with a few official papers and borrowed authority. He moved to a particular floorboard, triggering mechanisms that would seal Raven's Rest's most crucial evidence vaults. They've forgotten who they're dealing with. Sarah's Winchester appeared in her hands with practiced speed. "Papa, the backup plans! Already in motion," Cole assured her. "Catherine designed contingencies for exactly this scenario. Hayes, that package I gave you earlier?" The federal marshal patted his coat pocket. "Copies of key evidence already. On their way to every major newspaper and honest judge in 3 territories. Even if they take Raven's Rest, the truth's already spreading beyond their reach." The first militia unit reached the inn's front door, their leader's voice carrying false authority. Marcus Cole, by order of the territorial governor, you're under arrest for conspiracy and sedition. Surrender now, and your colleagues may receive mercy." Cole's smile carried echoes of Ghost Handmason's legend. "Interesting choice of words," he called back, "considering what Catherine's cameras caught the governor doing last spring. Sarah, show our guests what your mother's latest innovations can do." Sarah moved to a hidden panel, activating mechanisms that Catherine had spent years perfecting. Suddenly, the area around Raven's Rest blazed with brilliant light. Specially designed lanterns and reflectors, turning night into harsh day. Blinding. The militia riders, while leaving the inn's defenders, able to see clearly through carefully positioned filters. "Your mother's genius wasn't just in gathering evidence," Cole told her as chaos erupted outside. "It was in finding new ways to use truth as a weapon." Hayes, the secondary files. The federal marshal produced another set of documents. Proof that Harrison's judges have been taking bribes to issue exactly these kinds of warrants. Dating back years, all documented with Catherine's unimpeachable techniques. Through the windows, they could see the militia's formation breaking up, confused by the unexpected light and the sound of genuine cavalry approaching from the north. Captain Richards had not been idle during the day's revelations. They thought Ghost Hand Mason was the real threat, Cole observed, checking his own weapons with practiced ease. Never understood that Catherine's innovations, her methods for preserving and proving truth, were always the greater danger to their corruption. Sarah's voice carried steel as she watched more militia units appearing on the ridgeline. "They're not just here to arrest us, are they? They mean to destroy Ravens. Rest itself, bury every piece of evidence we've gathered." "That's exactly what they intend," came a new voice from the kitchen doorway. Morgan stood there, his face grim with fresh intelligence. "Just intercepted a messenger. Harrison ordered the entire inn burned, every document destroyed, every witness eliminated. They're calling it a cleansing action to protect territorial security." Cole's laugh carried no humor. 7 years they've been watching this place, thinking they knew all its secrets. Time to show them how wrong they are. He moved to the main control panel Catherine had designed, the one that could activate every defense and mechanism in Raven's Rest simultaneously. "Sarah, your mother left something special for exactly this moment. Bottom drawer of her workbench." Sarah found it immediately. A final journal, its pages filled with Catherine's precise handwriting. But these weren't just technical notes or evidence records. These were detailed instructions for activating Raven's Rest's ultimate contingency plans. "Mama knew," Sarah whispered, reading quickly, "knew they'd try something like this eventually. These protocols, these defensive systems, she built them specifically to counter martial law declarations and corrupt judicial orders." Hayes studied the approaching militia through specialized lenses Catherine had developed. They're deploying in standard territorial formations, using official tactics, trying to maintain the illusion of legitimate authority, which makes them predictable, Cole noted with grim satisfaction. Catherine studied every territorial militia manual, every official procedure, built counters for each standard approach. "Morgan, get word to Richards. Tell him it's time for tea." "Protocol 7. The former outlaw's eyes widened slightly. "The full response? Are you sure?" Cole's nod was decisive. Harrison pushed all his pieces onto the board, trying to use official authority to bury the truth. Time to show him why that was exactly the wrong move. As if in response to his words, signal fires began appearing on different peaks. Not the militia's emergency beacons, but a separate network that Catherine had spent years establishing. Honest settlers, reformed outlaws, and true lawmen who had been quietly positioned for exactly this moment, all responding to a call 7 years in the making. "Your mother's real genius," Cole told Sarah softly, "wasn't just in gathering evidence or designing defenses. It was in building a network of good people ready to stand for truth when the moment came. Every person who passed through Raven's Rest, who learned the difference between real justice and corrupt authority, they're all out there now, choosing their side in this fight. The militia commander's voice carried fresh urgency. "Cole, this is your final warning. Surrender the evidence and any witnesses or face the full force of territorial law." Sarah's laugh carried her mother's steel. "They still think this is about force," she observed, checking her rifle's action. "Still haven't figured out that Mama's greatest weapon was always truth itself." "Truth," Cole agreed, "and the good people are willing to stand for it." He moved to the window, where the militia's torches cast shifting shadows across Raven's Rest's frost-covered walls. "Time to show them what your mother really built here. Not just an inn, not just a fortress, but a monument to the idea that truth, properly protected and publicly revealed, is stronger than any corrupt authority." Through the windows came the sound of more riders approaching. Not militia this time, but honest citizens answering Catherine's long-planned signal. Ghost Hand. Mason's legend had served its purpose, buying time for something far more powerful to take root, a network of truth-seekers and justice defenders, all armed with Catherine's innovations and evidence-gathering techniques, all ready to stand against corruption no matter what false authority it wore. Harrison thought declaring martial law would let him bury the truth, Hayes observed, watching the approaching reinforcements. Never realized he was playing right into Catherine's final trap. "A trap 7 years in the making," Cole confirmed, his voice carrying the weight of patience finally bearing fruit. "Welcome to the real Raven's Rest, gentlemen. Time to show the territory what justice really looks like." The militia commander's next words froze everyone in the kitchen. "Cole, we have Judge Harrison here. He wants to speak with you directly." Through Catherine's specially designed observation ports, they could see Harrison himself riding forward. The corrupt judge's silver hair caught the harsh light of Raven's Rest's defensive systems, his judicial robes incongruous against the military saddle. "Mason," Harrison called out, using the name that revealed he'd always known the truth. 7 years of hide-and-seek ends tonight, but it doesn't have to end in blood. Name your price. Any price. The territory needs men like you, men who understand how power really works." Cole's response carried deadly calm. "Interesting choice, bringing yourself here personally, especially considering what Catherine's cameras caught you doing in your private chambers last spring. The executions you ordered, the land grabs you approved, the families you destroyed, all preserved in perfect detail." A murmur ran through the militia ranks at these words. Harrison's face tightened with barely controlled rage. "Photographs can be forged, Mason. Documents can be questioned. In times of civil unrest, the territory needs strong leadership, not wild accusations. Except Catherine developed ways to prove authenticity that even you can't challenge," Sarah called out, her voice carrying her mother's steel. "Every piece of evidence we've gathered comes with unbreakable proof of its validity. Methods that are already spreading to honest lawmen across 3 territories." As if to emphasize her words, more signal fires blazed to life on distant peaks. But these weren't just beacons. They were using Catherine's special compounds, creating distinctive colors that carried coded messages visible for miles. "Your reinforcements aren't coming, Harrison," Cole announced, reading the signals. "Seems your most loyal judges just discovered some interesting documents in their own offices. Amazing how truth has a way of multiplying, of appearing exactly where corrupt men think they're safest." Harrison's mask of judicial authority cracked slightly. "You're bluffing. No one could plant evidence that deeply without detection." "Plant evidence?" Cole's laugh carried no humor. "Catherine's genius wasn't in creating false proof, Harrison. It was in finding ways to preserve the evidence you thought you'd destroyed. Every document you burned, every witness you silenced, every crime you thought safely buried, she found ways to make truth permanent. Through Raven's Rest's specially designed acoustics, they could hear uncertain whispers spreading through the militia ranks. Men who'd been told they were enforcing legitimate authority were starting to question their orders. Your men deserve to know what they're really fighting for, Cole continued, his voice pitched to Carrie. Show them the territorial bank records. Zara, let them see where their commander's emergency powers funding really goes. Sarah activated one of Catherine's most innovative devices, a magic lantern projector modified to display photographic evidence on Raven's Rest's white walls. Suddenly, Harrison's financial crimes were literally written large across the inn's facade, visible to every militia rider. 7 years, Cole called out into the growing murmurs of discontent. 7 years of gathering proof, of developing methods to preserve truth that even corrupt judges can't bury. Your own greed betrayed you, Harrison. Your certainty that money and power could hide any crime. Morgan's voice cut through the tension. He's not alone out there. Spotted at least 3 professional gunmen in militia uniforms. They're positioning for clear shots at the upper windows. But Sarah was already moving, activating more of Catherine's defensive innovations. Specially angled mirrors caught and redirected the defensive lighting, eliminating every shadow where a shooter might hide. Your hired guns are predictable too, she observed coolly. Mama studied how professional killers think, built counters for every standard approach. This isn't just an in, Harrison. It's 7 years of preparation for exactly this moment. Hayes had been monitoring reactions through Catherine's specialized lenses. The militia's wavering. At least half of them are starting to realize they've been deceived. Another quarter looks ready to change sides entirely, because they're honest men at heart, Cole replied, his voice carrying conviction. Men who signed up to protect the territory, not enforce corrupt authority. Harrison's mistake was thinking official power could overcome basic human decency. Through the growing unrest came the thunder of approaching hooves. Captain Richards arriving with his cavalry unit, accompanied by a force that made Harrison's face go pale. Federal marshals, honest judges, territorial rangers who'd secretly allied with Catherine's cause, all converging on Raven's Rest for this final confrontation. Last chance, Harrison, Cole called out. Surrender now. Face justice with whatever dignity you have left, or watch everything you've built crumble as the truth spreads beyond any power to contain it. The corrupt judge's response was instant and violent. Burn it, he screamed to his hired guns. Burn everything, kill anyone who tries to stop you. But even as torches were raised, Catherine's final defenses activated. Water pipes hidden in Raven's Rest's walls burst to life, creating a protective barrier of spray and steam. The hired killer's first shots went wide, disrupted by defensive systems designed specifically to counter professional gunmen. Your mother's genius, Cole told Sarah as chaos erupted outside, wasn't just in gathering evidence, it was in understanding. The truth needs more than just proof. It needs protection, preparation, and people willing to stand for it when the moment comes. Through the steam and confusion came the sound of militia units changing sides, of honest men choosing truth over corrupt authority. Ghost Hand. Mason's legend had served its purpose, buying time for Catherine's greater work to take root. Now, in the harsh light of revealed truth, Harrison's empire of corruption was about to learn why some legends are more than just stories, their promises of justice finally kept. As the battle for Raven's Rest intensified, a new voice cut. Through the chaos, one that made Sarah's blood run cold. Hold your fire! Michael Bennett, the young deputy who'd spent months courting Sarah while supposedly helping their cause, rode forward through the steam and confusion. But he wasn't wearing his usual marshal's badge. Instead, he bore the special insignia of Harrison's personal guard. I tried to warn you, Sarah, Michael called out, his voice carrying genuine regret. Tried to convince you and your father to be reasonable. The territory's changing. Men like Harrison understand how power really works. They're building something bigger than old-fashioned ideas about justice. Cole's hand found Sarah's shoulder as she processed this betrayal. How long? She demanded, her voice steady despite the pain. How long have you been working for him? From the beginning, Michael admitted. My father, he owed Harrison for some land deals that went bad. The judge offered to forgive the debt if I could get close to you, learn what evidence you really... Through Catherine's specialized lenses, they could see Michael's father, James Bennett, among Harrison's inner circle. The wealthy rancher who'd posed as their ally was now revealing his true colors. But something changed, Michael continued, edging his horse closer. The more time I spent here, the more I saw what you were really building. This isn't just about evidence against Harrison anymore. You're trying to change how justice itself works in the territories. Hayes watched the younger man carefully through his rifle sights. He's buying time, the federal marshal observed quietly. They're positioning men behind the stable. Let them, Cole replied, his voice carrying a dangerous calm. Catherine designed every approach to this place as a potential trap. Michael's father should have taught him that betrayal often comes with unexpected costs. Sarah's Winchester hadn't wavered from her former suitor's heart. All those times you helped me practice shooting, she said softly. All those conversations about justice and truth. Were any of them real? More real than you know, Michael answered, and something in his voice made Cole pause. That's why I'm here now, trying to prevent a massacre. Harrison's not just planning to burn Raven's Rest. He's ordered artillery pieces from Fort Larson. They'll be here within the hour. Morgan's sharp intake of breath confirmed the threat. Army cannon could reduce this place to splinters, no matter how well Catherine designed it, but Cole's smile carried no fear. Catherine studied military equipment too, he revealed. Learned everything about how artillery works, how it can be countered. Sarah, show them what your mother built into the high ridge. Sarah moved to a particular control panel, one Catherine had masked as a simple kitchen cabinet. At her touch, hidden mechanisms whirred to life. Suddenly, powerful searchlights blazed from concealed positions along the ridge above Raven's Rest, turning night into harsh day and eliminating any position where artillery could be effectively placed. Your mother's genius wasn't just defensive, Cole told her, as they watched Michael and his men squint against the glare. She understood that sometimes the best defense is making certain attacks impossible in the first place. Michael's face showed genuine amazement. All this time, he breathed, we thought we were watching you, learning your secrets, but everything we learned was exactly what you wanted us to see. Catherine was always 3 steps ahead, Cole agreed. She knew. Harrison would try to use official authority to destroy us, eventually. Knew he'd send someone young and charming to try to win Sarah's trust, so she built counters for every approach, every betrayal, every possible attack. Through the harsh light, they could see uncertainty spreading through Harrison's forces. Men who'd been confident in their superior numbers and artillery support were suddenly realizing they faced something far more sophisticated than a simple inn. It's not too late, Michael, Sarah called out, her voice carrying despite the emotion. You said to yourself, this is about changing how justice works in the territories, about building something stronger than corrupt power. You can still choose the right side. For a moment, the young deputy's face showed terrible conflict. Then his hand moved, not to his gun, but to the insignia of Harrison's guard. With deliberate care, he unpinned it and let it fall into the mud. Sarah's right, he called out, turning to face his former commanders. I've spent months watching. What they're building here, it's not just evidence against Harrison, it's a whole new way of fighting corruption. Methods that can't be bought or buried or burned away. James Bennett's voice carried fury at his son's betrayal. You fool! Harrison offered us everything. Power, position, a place in the new order he's building. An order built on blood money and buried truth, Michael replied, moving his horse to stand with Raven's Rest's defenders. Sarah and her father showed me something better, a way to serve justice that doesn't require selling your soul. Harrison's laugh carried no humor. Touching conversion, boy, but it changes nothing. When those artillery pieces arrive, they won't, came a new voice as Captain Richards rode into view with his cavalry unit. Fort Larson's commander received some interesting documents this morning. Proof that certain territorial officials have been selling military supplies to raiders and outlaws. He sends his regrets, but your artillery request has been denied. Cole's hand found Sarah's shoulder again, offering silent support as she processed Michael's choice. Your mother believed in redemption, he told her quietly. Believed that truth, properly presented, could turn even enemies into allies. That's why she designed Raven's Rest not just as a fortress, but as a beacon, showing people a better way when they're ready to see it. Michael dismounted, moving to stand beside Sarah with his hands well away from his weapons. I'm sorry, he said, softly. Sorry for how it started, but not sorry for choosing truth over power in the end. Through Catherine's specialized lenses, they could see Harrison's forces responding to this new betrayal. The corrupt judge's careful plans were unraveling, not through violence or force, but through the power of truth to change hearts and minds. Your mother would be proud, Cole told Sarah as they watched more militia units begin lowering their weapons. Not just of the fortress she built, but of how it's serving its true purpose. Showing people that justice is always a choice, always an option, no matter how deep in corruption they've waded. Ghost Hand, Mason's legend had served its purpose, buying time for Catherine's greater work to take root. Now, in the harsh light of revealed truth, even those who'd come to destroy Raven's Rest were discovering why some betrayals lead not to destruction, but to redemption. The battlefield outside Raven's Rest had shifted from a scene of impending violence to one of profound transformation. The air still bristled with tension, but the cracks in Harrison's facade were growing wider with every passing moment. Men who had ridden in with torches and weapons now exchanged uncertain glances, questioning the orders they had followed without thought. Harrison, his control slipping with every defection, snarled like a cornered animal. You think this changes anything? You think a few speeches and some tricks can stop what's coming? The people don't want your idealistic justice. They want order, power, and I'm the only one who can deliver it. Cole stepped forward, his voice calm and deliberate, carrying across the courtyard like a hammer striking steel. You're wrong, Harrison. People don't crave the kind of order that crushes them under its heel. They want hope, they want fairness, they want the truth, and the truth is the foundation of real power. As if to punctuate his words, a wave of sound rolled through the valley, a distant chorus of voices. From the ridges and foothills, reinforcements began to arrive. Farmers, miners, townsfolk, and ranchers. They bore no uniforms, but they carried the same resolve. These were the people Catherine had spent her life defending, now standing shoulder to shoulder, armed not just with rifles, but with the strength of conviction. Harrison turned pale, his bluster faltering. This is madness, he muttered, looking toward his dwindling forces. They can't all believe in your fantasy of a world ruled by truth. It's not a fantasy, Sarah said, stepping forward with her Winchester resting in her hands. It's the world my mother believed in, the world she worked to create, and it's the world you're watching come to life, right here, right now. The flickering torches of Harrison's loyalists began to dim as more men cast them aside, choosing instead to stand among the swelling ranks of the townsfolk. The corrupt judge, once so certain of his dominance, now found himself isolated. Even his hired gunmen were hesitating, their professional instincts warning them that this fight was no longer winnable. You'll regret this, Harrison spat, backing his horse toward the remaining loyalists. All of you, When the dust settles, you'll see how naive you've been." "You're right about one thing," Cole replied. "The dust will settle, and when it does, the people will see exactly what you've done, because Catherine made sure of it." With a nod from Cole, Sarah activated another of Catherine's devices. A massive signal flare shot into the sky, trailing sparks that illuminated the entire valley. It was the final piece of Catherine's plan, a broadcast beacon that linked to hidden transmitters scattered across the territory. Even as the battle reached its climax, the truth would be spreading to every corner of the land. Documents, images, and recordings carried by the same signals that had guided their allies to Raven's Rest. For the first time, Harrison looked truly afraid. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "You can't fight the system forever." "We don't have to," Cole said, his eyes steady and unyielding. "The system will collapse under the weight of its own lies. All we have to do is keep the truth alive." As the beacon's light bathed the battlefield, Harrison's forces broke. Some dropped their weapons and surrendered outright. Others fled into the night, knowing they would never escape the reach of Catherine's evidence. Only Harrison remained, his horse stamping nervously beneath him. "Take him," Cole ordered, and a squad of federal marshals stepped forward to place the disgraced judge under arrest. Harrison fought briefly, but it was a futile struggle. The man who had ruled through fear and manipulation now found himself powerless in the face of justice. Sarah watched as the marshals led Harrison away, her emotions a swirl of triumph and bittersweet loss. "She'd have loved to see this," she said quietly. Cole placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression softening. "She is seeing it, Sarah. Everything she built, everything she believed in. It all led to this moment. And it's just the beginning." The light from the beacon continued to shine, a symbol of the new world Catherine had envisioned. As the crowd began to cheer, their voices echoing across the valley, Sarah allowed herself a rare smile. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like justice had a fighting chance. "Let's get to work," she said, turning back toward the fortress. "There's a lot of truth left to protect." The sound of shifting weapons reached Cole's ears as the militia ranks continued to falter. He could see it in their faces, men torn between blind loyalty and the growing realization that they'd been pawns in a corrupt game. The once imposing force surrounding Raven's Rest was now fractured, doubting cracking their resolve like frost, splitting stone. Harrison, however, was far from finished, his expression twisted with rage as he barked orders. "Form up! Do you think these sentimental theatrics will spare you? They're playing you for fools. Any man who deserts now will be treated as a traitor when this is over." The judge's threats were met with uneasy silence. A few loyalists tightened their grips on their weapons, but others shifted nervously, their eyes darting between their commanders and the illuminated evidence still displayed on the inn's walls. Cole stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "He's lying to you, just like he's lied about everything else. Look at those records, at the names of your neighbors who were sold out for a bribe. Look at the money stolen from your own families to line his pockets. Harrison's empire was built on the backs of honest men like you. Don't give him the power to destroy what's left of your dignity." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd, louder this time. More militia members began lowering their weapons, their gazes fixed on the damning evidence projected for all to see. Harrison, seeing his grip slipping, made a desperate move. He turned to his most loyal lieutenants and hissed, "Kill Mason! And the girl. Do it now before this rabble turns completely." 3 gunmen stepped forward, their movements precise and practiced, their eyes cold with determination. But as they raised their rifles, Raven's Rest sprang into action. Sarah's hand darted to the panel beside her, activating yet another of Catherine's hidden defenses. A burst of blinding light erupted from concealed projectors, disorienting the hired killers. Simultaneously, a series of steel-reinforced barricades slid into place around the windows and doors, cutting off their lines of fire. The three gunmen scrambled to recover, but Hayes and Morgan were faster. From their elevated positions, they fired precision shots that struck the ground at the mercenaries' feet, warning shots that sent them diving for cover. The message was clear. The defenders of Raven's Rest were not to be trifled with. Harrison's fury boiled over. "Do you think this changes anything? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I am the law in this territory. Without me, there is chaos." "No, Harrison," Cole replied, his voice resonating with quiet strength. "You are the chaos. You've used the law as a weapon to serve yourself, to crush anyone who stood in your way. But the law isn't a man. It's an ideal, one that doesn't die just because someone like you corrupts it, and tonight we're taking it back." As if on cue, the sound of galloping hooves filled the air once more. The federal marshals and territorial rangers, led by Captain Richards, had reached the perimeter. Their uniforms gleamed in the torchlight, a stark contrast to the ragged desperation of Harrison's forces. Richards rode forward, his voice carrying authority born of integrity. "Judge Harrison, by order of the Federal Circuit, you are under arrest for corruption, embezzlement, conspiracy, and abuse of power. Your men are hereby ordered to stand down and surrender their weapons." Harrison's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think I'll go quietly? You think I'll stand trial before a court packed with your lackeys?" "You won't have a choice," Richards replied coolly. "Your crimes are too well documented, your allies too few, and if you resist—" He gestured toward the combined forces surrounding the militia. "You'll be lucky to leave this valley alive." The militia ranks crumbled further. Some men dropped their weapons entirely, their faces etched with shame. Others stepped back, unwilling to fight for a man who had so clearly betrayed their trust. A few loyalists tried to rally, but they were quickly subdued by the rangers and marshals, their resistance fleeting and futile. Inside Raven's Rest, Sarah exhaled a shaky breath as the tension began to ease. Michael stood beside her, his posture stiff but resolute. "It's over," he said quietly, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Not yet," Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on Harrison. "Men like him don't give up that easily." And she was right. Harrison, seeing his forces collapsing and his escape routes cut off, made one final gamble. With a sudden burst of movement, he drew a hidden pistol from beneath his robes and aimed it at Cole. The shot rang out, sharp and deafening, but it never reached its target. Michael, moving faster than anyone had anticipated, stepped in front of Cole and took the bullet to his shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall, his hand already reaching for his own sidearm. Before Harrison could fire again, Sarah's rifle barked once, her aim true. The bullet struck Harrison's weapon, sending it spinning from his grasp. The corrupt judge clutched his hand in pain, his face pale with shock and fury. "Enough!" Sarah shouted, her voice carrying the weight of her mother's legacy. "No more lies, no more threats, no more corruption. This ends here." Richards and his men moved in swiftly, placing Harrison in irons and securing the remaining loyalists. The once feared judge was now a broken man, his power stripped away by the very truth he had sought to bury. As the dust settled, Cole turned to Sarah and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," he said softly. "You showed courage and conviction when it mattered most." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She taught me that justice is worth any price," she replied, "and tonight we proved she was right." Outside, the signal fires continued to burn, their distinctive colors announcing the victory to allies across the territories. Raven's Rest had stood firm, not just as a fortress, but as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of those who defended it. And as the first light of dawn broke over the valley, Cole, Sarah, and their allies prepared for the next chapter of their fight, a fight not just to expose corruption, but to rebuild the law itself, stronger and more just than ever before. The morning sun rose over the valley, its golden rays spilling over the scorched earth and broken barricades. Raven's Rest stood defiant, a silent witness to the battle that had unfolded the night before. The once ominous shadows of Harrison's militia had been replaced by the orderly movements of federal marshals and rangers, securing the remnants of the battlefield and tending to the wounded. Cole stepped out onto the inn's porch, his worn coat catching the breeze as he looked out over the aftermath. Men and women who had once fought under Harrison's command now worked side by side with the defenders of Raven's Rest, helping to gather supplies and rebuild the damaged structures. There was an air of quiet determination among them, a shared understanding that they had been given a second chance to make things right. Behind him, Sarah emerged, her arm wrapped in a sling, but her posture unyielding. Despite the exhaustion in her eyes, there was a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. She joined Cole, her gaze sweeping over the scene below. "They're helping," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "They want to do better," Cole replied. "And they'll need someone to lead them." Sarah turned to him, her brow furrowing. "What about you? You're the one who stood up to Harrison. You brought us all together." Cole shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This fight was never about me. It was about this place and the people who call it home. You have the strength to guide them, Sarah. Your mother saw it, and now so do I." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. Deep down, she knew he was right. Raven's Rest was her home, her family's legacy. It was her responsibility now to ensure that legacy endured. "I'll try," she said finally, her voice steady. "But only if you promise to stick around. We'll need all the help we can get." Cole chuckled, tipping his hat. "You've got yourself a deal." As the morning wore on, the valley began to come alive with the sounds of rebuilding. The people of Raven's Rest worked tirelessly, their determination fueled by the knowledge that they had won more than just a battle. They had reclaimed their future. In the distance, the federal marshals loaded Harrison and his remaining loyalists into wagons bound for trial. The former judge sat hunched and defeated, his hands bound in chains. His power had crumbled, and with it, the fear he had used to control so many. Justice would be served, and his name would become a cautionary tale for anyone who dared to corrupt the law. As the wagons disappeared over the horizon, Michael approached Sarah and Cole, his arm in a sling, but his grin as wide as ever. "I've got to admit, I didn't think we'd pull it off," he said, leaning against the porch railing. "But we did it." "We did," Sarah agreed. She turned to Cole, her expression thoughtful. "What happens now?" Cole looked out over the valley, his eyes distant. "Now you rebuild. But don't just rebuild the walls and the buildings. Rebuild the trust. Rebuild the law. Make sure it stands for everyone, not just the powerful." Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. "We will." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the people of Raven's Rest continued their work, united by a shared purpose. The signal fires that had burned through the night were extinguished, their job done, but the spirit of defiance they represented lived on, stronger than ever. And as Cole Mason saddled his horse later that day, preparing to ride out once more, he glanced back at the inn one last time. Sarah stood on the porch, watching him with a mixture of gratitude and determination. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Her mother's legacy was in capable hands. Cole tipped his hat, a silent farewell, and rode off into the horizon. The road ahead was long, and there were still battles to fight. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of hope. Raven's Rest had stood its ground, and so would he, wherever the winds of justice carried him next. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.